Now, I know there are Republicans who disagree with my approach. And I've said this before. If they have other ideas for how we can keep America safe, grow our economy, while helping middle-class families feel some sense of economic security, I welcome their ideas. But their numbers have to add up. And what we can't do is play politics with folks' economic security or with our national security.
Our president a week ago announcing a $4 trillion budget as he was visiting the Department of Homeland Security, and it is fair to ask of the president, do your numbers add up, Mr. President? Of course, President Obama says he welcomes all Republican ideas, but it's also worth noting that he has promised to veto some Republican initiatives. So, what to make of this and a $4 trillion budget and the specter of Homeland Security funding expiring on the 27th of this month? The battle of the budget, the showdown in our nation's capital continues, and to discuss more about these very real money matters, we're pleased to be joined by Ryan Girdusky, who checks in from Newsmax New York to go in depth. Ryan, you recently said, hey, some cuts can take place off the top. What dollar amount do you have in mind?
Right. Well, the president proposed nearly $4 trillion budget. Of that, I mean, if you don't take in the new increases that he's proposing, we could cut $50 billion very easily from the budget from last year. And we can cut that basically without throwing grandma off a cliff, without endangering single mothers and children and everything else Democrats usually accuse people who want to cut government of doing.
And one of the big offsets, the money that you point out in a recent article that you penned, the estimate of how much going to illegal aliens in terms of tax credits?
About $5 billion goes to illegal aliens for tax credits. There were several things that came off of different senators over the years. One is the billions that go to tax credits to illegal immigrants on taxes that they don't pay. Like, they don't pay them at all, but they get a tax credit at the end of it for things like an earned income tax credit for not earning enough income. And there are other tax credits that they get as well. There's other things like more than $40 billion, which is the bulk of it, is used in duplicate government works. So we have 9 government agencies right now that deal with things like AIDS in the inner city. And we have other duplicate government agencies that deal with things like obesity. If we were just to combine them, save on office space, save on personnel, to do the same things without actually cutting the spending that goes to those programs, we could save tens of billions of dollars in this country. And it was brought up to a vote only once, and it failed, unfortunately, but that was when the Republicans were in the minority. And certainly there could be some outreach across the aisle to moderate senators like Joe Manchin over issues like that.
Well, as you mentioned this, and you've outlined some areas where there is government duplication, maybe even triplication of efforts that could be consolidated. I'm wondering about another approach, and that is, we have seen time and again people propose on the floor of the House and the Senate, hey, just cut 1 cent from every dollar of spending. That sounds very appealing, and yet it just never seems to get done. Is there such an institutional bias for spending that we never see really honest-to-goodness, genuine cuts being made?
Well, everyone always likes to increase spending. Everyone always has a pet project. Everyone always wants to go to the constituents and say, I got more money for education, for healthcare, for schools. Yeah, that's the creature in most state houses and in Washington, D.C., unfortunately. The problem I have with the penny plan is it's so easily reversible. The cuts that I propose in my FoxNews.com article, the cuts that I talked about, were permanent cuts. They were the ending of certain government programs, so they don't just cut 1 cent this year, easily change for next year. Certain parts of overspending that I addressed in my article will never be reduplicated, or don't ever need to be reduplicated, even if spending needs to go up for a war, let's say. One of the things that I talked about was that Senator Tom Coburn, former Senator Tom Coburn, proposed a bill back last year which had bipartisan support, but Harry Reid wouldn't let it go through let it go to a vote. Was called "Let Me Google That For You" Act, and basically that we have a government agency which spends $50 million a year, and the budget for which is going up every single year, that all they do is they take national documents and put them in an office space available for the public. The only problem with that is in the early 2000s, everything became available on Google and everything became available online. So they serve no purpose anymore. And it's time that Republicans looking at what useless government entities were created back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and eliminating them. And if that means, retiring Senator John McCain and other useless government entities, we should do that as well.
Well, Ryan, as you mentioned this, in the 2 minutes that remain, I know a lot of people say, wait a minute, $50 billion sounds like a lot until you put it up against $4 trillion. But the point you're making about your plan is these would be honest to goodness, genuine cuts that would last. This wouldn't be subject to a year-to-year review. They would remain in place. In the final analysis, do you believe that finality, that certainty, that tangibility dooms your modest proposal?
No, because, okay, if you look at sequestration, and this is the one thing people always say, it's only $50 billion. Sequestration was $85 billion, and people were losing their minds over it. This is $50 billion, which is a substantial cut, and it is a permanent cut. So, but most of these bills had bipartisan support. Most of these bills were supported by Democrats, and Harry Reid refused to let them come up to a vote. So I don't think that it means that Democrats wouldn't vote for it. And in fact, I got a lot of more positive feedback from the article from liberals who said, I have no problem with any of these cuts, than I did with Republicans who sat there and said, it needs to be bigger. We need to look at what we can do and not rip our hair out of what we can't do. And what we can't do right now with the government as it is have major broad stroke Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, major entitlement reform.
Ryan, 20 seconds left. The fight over Homeland Security funding, will there be a compromise, or in your opinion, will there be a shutdown?
Probably a compromise, unfortunately.
Well, Ryan Girdusky, we do appreciate both the plan you put forth and your reasoned analysis of what we might expect out of Washington, and $50 billion is real money. So I would agree with you on that. Thanks very much for your time as you join us from Newsmax New York. When we come back, my old congressional colleague Peter King of New York, following this Newsmax Now update.